Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Annette Reynolds. This is my business partner, Lynn Cohen. We've been working together for almost 10 years. We had lunch before we came over, and I swear to you, I had a Diet Coke. I feel giddy enough, like she may have put some rum in it. Okay? I'm just feeling that mood right now. You know, when we first started calling senior centers about this program, one of them said, well, will the presenters be sensitive to the needs of the population we have here, our elders? And I'm thinking, geez, my partner's an old lady. She's 71 years old. I'm 6 years older than she is.
So we hope that we have like interests and think a lot alike.
So I met Lynn about 10 years ago when I switched real estate brokerages, and she was the manager. And then a few years later, I was offered a position, they call it productivity coach, but it was mother to the new agents. I was the one to get the new agents trained and productive and coached, and it was a thankless job, but that's another whole story. Then a few years, excuse me, a year or so after I started that job, I walked into the office and Lynn says, you have a new listing. And I said, oh. She says, we put the condo on the market. Well, since that time, we have left that agency. We started our own. We decided we didn't want all the overhead of a big box brokerage. It was just going to be the two of us. We love helping people buy and sell homes. And this way we didn't have to put up with the hogwash of powers that thought they were.
We had 200 agents to take care of. My phone rang night and day. And so this was our idea of retirement. And there's a lot more joy in being able to communicate directly with people in the field. And yet we learned so much because we saw every pratfall that could occur. We solved almost every problem in real estate imaginable. And I think it prepared us well to talk to the needs of our senior community when it comes to the decisions we must make about downsizing or being able to stay in our homes.
I wanted to digress just a second here. If you look over here, we have this lovely little sign. About 8 months ago, Lynn met a gentleman, an attorney, through one of her networking groups that was working with Net of Compassion, an agency in Worcester. And they have a shelter for the unhoused. They have showers, things we take for granted. They distribute food. They distribute clothing to those who need them. And magnificent job on a shoestring budget. We just fell in love with it. So Lynn says, we have to support them. I said, great, they're in Worcester. And we don't do a lot of business in Worcester County, although she just closed one deal yesterday in Douglas. And I said, okay, we can support them, but let's find a couple of other organizations closer to our market where we work. And so now every time we have a closing or one of our agents has a closing, I write a check. It's not a big check, but I write a check to Net of Compassion, Friends of the Callahan Center, and the Community Day Center in Waltham. And it doesn't seem like much, but when I look at the financials, I've spent thousands of dollars this year. And I call it my trickle-down theory. See, people like you let us sell your houses, we make a lot of money, and we trickle it down to the homeless shelters. Tongue-in-cheek. But one thing that we make available to our agents when they're doing open houses, these little bags. And we ask people who care to, do you have any extra toiletries? or maybe you have some socks you haven't unwrapped from last Christmas, or underwear. These are the things that the shelters are looking for. If you care to, take one bag, fill it up, call us, we'll come pick it up and take it to where it's needed. That's an aside, okay? But we're real proud of the work that we've done, and it's gratifying to be closely involved with these organizations because they do great work with a little bit of money. That's it. That's the sales pitch, huh? So, when Lynn said to me, we're selling the condo, I said, they're going to take me out of my home feet first, period. I'm in my 13th house since I've been married.
Whoa.
I've been married for a long time, but it's still a lot of homes. And I'm tired of moving. And to add insult to injury, the last time we moved from Milton to Waltham, my husband, now, he's got Scotch ancestry, okay? He says, I'm not paying any money for anybody to move us. We can pack it up, it's not that far, and you can drive the truck. I said, thank you. You should have seen me tooling up 128 in a diesel power. It's the first time I ever drove a diesel. One thing I've learned, my other car was a Mustang, okay? 4.6 liter, and when I step on the gas, in diesel, you step on the gas and it says, I think I can, I think I can. It will get there eventually, but it took me a while to learn how to do it. After that, I don't care what anybody's going to charge me, I will never, ever move myself again. But there are reasons why I don't want to move again, besides the aggravation and agita of physically moving. My 4 grandchildren live within half an hour of me. One of them is living with me now. We have had family members living with us for the last 15 or 20 years, one way or another. My son had addiction problems. He lived with us, I think, for 12 years before he went down to West Virginia as part of an addiction fellowship, is now an attending physician at the University of West Virginia Hospital Addiction Medicine Department. But when he was leaving, he says to his second son, hey, Zach, I'm leaving the end of the month, you can have my room. So for the summer, my younger grandson moved in. And then when he moved out, his older sib moved in, and he's still with us now. And I like having them with me. If I fall down the steps, there's somebody there to call 911, okay? I don't ever have to say, I've fallen and I can't get up. I've got somebody there to help me. And it keeps us tighter as a family. So I looked at this situation. I say, if I'm going to stay here forever, what do I have to do so that I can? Now, I have a relatively new knee. It's 7 months old. And it's a 2-story house, but we do have one room downstairs that I could convert to the bedroom. And it's only 2 feet from the bathroom and not much farther from the refrigerator, so I figured I was in hog heaven right then and there. But I did make several other accommodations, and the truth is I didn't stay in the downstairs bedroom. I went upstairs. I got a bathroom up there too. And climbing up and down was good for my knee. But I could make that accommodation in my home. Now, when we first started doing this program a couple of years ago, we actually had a whole panel. I had mortgage people, and we had an architect. And this architect, Stuart, specializes in retrofitting homes for accessibility. It's not inexpensive, but when he comes in and he takes a look and he takes that old 70-year-old bathroom of mine and says, I can make it accessible so if you have to, you can bring a wheelchair into here. And if I wanted to stay in my home, it may be worth whatever cost to be able to do it. What he did was open up my mind to see other possibilities that I had never considered. Okay. Another thing he mentioned was, well, you could put an elevator in. I said, say what? And he said, well, you know, when you take a look at the value of the home, assuming that architecturally it could support an elevator. My house is all cut up. There's no place to put an elevator in my home, but in some homes you could do it. So it'll cost you $50,000 or $60,000. And I can hear you thinking, she's throwing $50,000 and $60,000 around like it's nothing. I live in a crappy little 3-bedroom home in Waltham, and it's nothing fantastic. It's a crappy little home, okay? It's about 1,500 square feet. And it's worth about $700,000 right now. Blows me away. I bought it for less than $3. It's worth $700,000. If somebody said to me, hey, $20,000, $30,000, I can do something really special with your home and add a lot of value, I might consider that. So if I'm thinking in terms of when I bought my home for $280,000, it sounds like a lot of money, but now at $70,000 and I have no mortgage, that's a different calculation for me, okay? Which leads me to another question. If I wanted to do that, where would I get the money? Most of my net worth is tied up in my home. I could go to the bank. In fact, I did go to the bank a few years ago. They had a sale on money. They did. They said, we'll give you a line of credit. It'll cost you no more than $75. And as far as I'm concerned, to go through the whole mortgage process, because a line of credit is in fact a mortgage on the house, secured by the house, I have to, you know, go through with the income tax returns and W-2s and everything else. But for $75, you know what it costs when you're buying a house to close? It costs a few $1,000s. I said, oh, such a deal. So I said to my dear husband, I said, honey, I want to go get this line of credit. He says, I don't want any more debt. I said, honey, we're not going to use it. It's our safety net. So for $75, I got a $100,000 line of credit. It costs me about that every year to renew it, and I figure it's cheap insurance. I never used it.
But Annette, you were working. You could qualify for this loan.
If I weren't working, I couldn't get a line of credit. Banks don't mess around with maybe they'll pay me back, maybe they won't anymore. They want to feel really comfortable that they're going to get paid back. And for a mortgage, you need income. What would you suggest if I wasn't working?
Well, there are ways to qualify using other assets, if you have them. But I have a question for you. How many of you have heard horrible, scary stories about something called a reverse mortgage? And those stories were well earned until several years ago when Fannie and Freddie, FHA, took over the process of a reverse mortgage. And for some of us, it's a really, really viable option. Basically, it's a loan against the value of your house that you personally don't have to repay until the day that you leave the property. Either you move out, you go to assisted living, or your heirs go to sell the house. And then any interest that's accrued during that time gets tacked onto the balance of the loan, and the bank is paid back at that time. But for some of us, it's a really viable option. The changes that happened when the feds regulated reverse mortgage really stemmed around making sure that you and your heirs understood the ramifications of the loan. Because the horror stories really occurred when our kids go to sell the property after we're gone and they find out that the value is diminished greatly by the interest that has accrued, and the kids freaked out. That's really the crux of what the problem was. And so now, the feds require extensive counseling for not only you, but for your heirs, before they will work with you on such a loan. And there are specialists in reverse mortgage who control that process. It's not an inexpensive loan. The closing costs are accelerated because banks don't ever want to lose money. So one of your closing costs would be an insurance policy, so that if the interest accrued exceeded the value of the house when it was sold, that they would be made whole. So the closing costs could be anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 that would get rolled into the loan. But in some cases, it's a really good move if you really want to stay in your home.
When we go in to speak to somebody about either buying or selling a home, we ask a lot of questions. And I had somebody who wanted to sell a condo in Savin Hill. His partner had extensive medical bills. He didn't have the cash to pay them. And he said, if I sell the condo, then I can pay the bills. I said, and then what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to buy a condo just like the one I'm selling. I said, this doesn't compute. Okay. For him, a reverse mortgage, because he was old enough, was a perfect solution. He could get the equity out of his home in cash so he could pay his expenses and stay in the condo. Now, he still has the mortgage, but he's not being asked to pay it every month. When the mortgage person says, based on your age and the value of your home, I can give you this much money in a reverse mortgage. The older you get, the more money you can get, by the way, because they're figuring you will not outlive their tables, that you're going to die at an average time, okay? So it's all a bet that you're not going to outlive the money. I call insurance legalized gambling, but that's another whole story. But if you do, you're not responsible for the money. So for him, this was a perfect solution. For many people, it's not. The only other thing I would add is, let's just say for my $700,000 home, I could get $400,000 as a reverse mortgage, and that's probably about right. Because my husband's going to be 80, I'm 77, about that. I could take it all out as a lump sum, or I could use it as a line of credit. So in other words, there's no set way that you have to use the funds. We're not necessarily recommending that people go get a reverse mortgage. However, many people overlook this as an option, one that they should consider. And before I give the mic back to Lynn, usually we give a caveat right at the beginning of our talk. Don't listen to everything we say and believe it 100%, because you should speak to experts who can help you make these decisions. They're big decisions. They're big financial decisions. They have an impact not only on you, but your family. So we recommend get a good financial advisor who understands where you are and what you're trying to accomplish. Work with an attorney who understands senior issues, trust issues, and get a good accountant. Before you sign anything, you should speak with the experts to find out the impact of your decisions on your life and the lives of your family. In fact, I did that once, and I cut out 2 of my kids from my will. I've since put them back in, but they really pissed me off. But then, I'm staying in my home. You downsized. Can you tell us about that?
So, for me, the downsizing was a financial decision. My husband's 85. He's still working full-time. We were living in a condo in a quote-unquote luxury building in Chestnut Hill.
It was gorgeous.
It was big enough. It was lovely. We were there 30 years. But my condo fee was $2,000 a month. And I started looking at it and talking to my husband, and it's 3 years since we made this move. And I said, you know, we're doing fine right now. We can handle this right now. But if we have health issues, if one of us decides not to be working, it's kind of dumb to be paying this kind of money. And he was very hesitant because he's stubborn. This condo was about 1.5 miles from his boyhood home. This was his hood. In order to make an effective financial downsize, we would have to move out of that Newton Chestnut Hill area, and he just wanted no part of it. And we talked about it. It took about 1.5 years for him to make this decision, and it finally happened because I made him a bet. And I said to him, if I can find us a property that meets our needs, that's nearer our kids, and allows you to take half the value of this condo and put it away for retirement, would you do it? And he thought it couldn't be done, but I've been in real estate for 25 years and I knew I could. So before he knew it, we were moving. Annette handled the listing. We had an offer within,
Wasn't very long.
not very long, and then the fun began. I really did not anticipate how hard the move would be. And it was a combination of managing him. You know, we only moved 6 miles west. 6 miles. You'd think I moved him across country. Even now, he'll, with a glint in his eye, say, you know, you put me in the middle of the goddamn woods and you ruined my life, you know. But I was able to find a different condo. We're in a townhome with a first floor master and a loft for when kids visit, and a basement and a direct entry garage for half of what I sold my condo for. So for us, downsizing was not necessarily about the property not fitting our needs, but about planning for our economic future, to be able to take $500,000 and put it into retirement was too good to pass up. The problem really began when I started to unpack my cupboards to get ready to move. And I had so much stuff. We'd been there 30 years. And it was so overwhelming that, and I was exhausted, to be honest with you. And I didn't anticipate this. I'd helped others move for, at that time, 22 years. It's like, what's the big deal?
You didn't feel their pain, did you?
I didn't, but I sure do now. To the point where I actually called on an organizer to help me, because I found that I was like muscle bound with the decisions that had to be made. I had my dishes. I had my good set of dishes. I had my mother's good dishes, and I had 2 sets of my grandmother's good dishes. I had my mother's silver and my crystal and their crystal.
Oh, wait a second. You had 2 daughters, and Richard
They
has a couple
don't
kids.
want your stuff. They don't want, no matter how much you love it, they don't want your stuff. So the best advice I can give you about managing your stuff is to divide it into 2 piles. The stuff I love and cherish, and everything else. And I mean that most sincerely. So I moved 1 set of crystal. I found out that a glass of wine actually tastes better in crystal if you use it. And I made the promise that if I moved it, I was going to use it and enjoy it. And I have kept to that promise. But I have to tell you that the actual act of physically separating it, deciding where it was going to go, and getting rid of the other pile, I found overwhelming. And it was at that point that Annette and I started to gather a list of resources, which we'll be happy to share with you, that made the process a little easier. The hardest things to get rid of are furniture. Nobody wants it. It depreciates worse than a car off the lot and has very little value. We found a little shop in Waltham called Buy and Consign. They'll remove it. They'll charge you to move it, but so what? You gotta move it anyway. And they'll put it in their consignment shop for 60 days, and if it sells, you'll get a check, and if it doesn't, you'll get a donation slip for a tax refund. The hardest piece I had to give up was a hutch that was my mom's, and I really didn't even like it, but it was my mom's. And I kept it because it was my mom's. And I knew in my new place I had no place for it. And I actually had, and I lost my mom when I was 35, so it was a long conversation to, had to dredge up a lot of memory to have this conversation with her, and she says, oh, stop being flaky, it's just stuff. And I know that's what she would have said. I know it. So you have to make those hard decisions, and then there are people who can help you with the physical end of it. We want to talk a little bit about those organizers, because they come in all shapes and sizes.
So that's why I grabbed the phone, because the microphone, because I had a client who sold her condo. And it really wasn't so full of stuff, but she had her furniture and her belongings. She couldn't move forward. Just didn't know what to do. I said, I have a gift for you. I paid for a couple of hours for an organizer to come in, and they walked from room to room, and they came up with a plan, and that's all she needed. She couldn't hit the starter. Once she hit the starter, she was okay. The car kept going, the process kept going, but for a couple of $100, she had a plan, knew what she was going to do with everything in every room. Lynn, you did something similar.
I did.
And there are other organizers who will come in and do everything for you. It's more expensive, but if you're having difficulty doing it, just consider it's the cost of moving. There are all of us who are so confident in everything, we say, I can do it myself, I don't need an organizer.
I was almost arrogant in my opinion that I could handle it. After all, I'm a professional in this business, I know how to do it. I was really thrown by how hard it was. And so I came up with a second golden rule. The first one is, if you move it, you must love it, you must cherish it, and use it, enjoy it. And the second was, and I live by this even now, anything new that comes into my house requires 2 things that must be removed from my house. So I bought myself a new sweatshirt, and 2 old ones had to go. And that has, I just don't want to burden my kids with stuff.
Well, funny, we did a follow-up program to this one we call Where Do You Go? We did that down in Sharon yesterday, and one of the gals said, yeah, I saw something, I wanted to buy it, but I didn't want to throw 2 things out. She remembered them saying that. We sponsored the Waltham Land Trust 5K run this weekend, and had gorgeous green t-shirts. I said, do you want one then? She goes, no.
No, because I already threw my 2 out. I don't have anything left to throw out.
She really lives by that.
And then the other thing, I did keep a set of my grandmother's charger plates.
Oh, they're
They're
gorgeous.
drop-dead, magnificent, gorgeous. And in order to be true to myself, when I redid my kitchen in my new place, I built a plate rack so that I can see them and enjoy them every day. So that's the best advice I can give you about managing your stuff. And again, we have, 3 or 4 different organizers who work at different levels. One of them's actually a social worker who helped us move a hoarder. So it depends on how much help you need. It's available, it's there. We actually helped a client move who was living, and she's our age, Emily.
Oh, yeah.
Emily's in her 70s. She was living in a third floor walk-up in a condo in Brookline worth about $700,000, but she was on food stamps. That's just crazy. But she was entrenched in her neighborhood, really paralyzed with a certain fear, and we brought in one of the organizers who helped her sort and talk through it, and we got her moved into a gorgeous senior rental building. So there are solutions if you just ask for the help. And I think that the other thing that I dealt with was my husband.
We always do.
We always do. But I didn't anticipate how, 35 years ago, I moved across country to marry the guy. And he hasn't moved, he hadn't moved at all.
It was into his condo they moved.
Yeah, he owned it he bought it a year before I met him. So I really didn't anticipate how hard the move would be emotionally for him. And I would say that that experience made me better at my job, a little more compassionate, and it helped that we're solid and that we could talk about it and I could help him through it. And, he teases me about it, but he's pretty happy right now.
See my Hummel? When my mother passed, it's been 4 years, my sister was the executrix of the estate, and she took care of everything. It was wonderful. I didn't have to worry about just cash the check when it came. But she just recently sold her house in Pennsylvania and moved to her condo in Florida. They decided they just didn't need the expensive 2 homes. They'd come up next summer and rent a place to be near family in the summertime, but down to Florida. And she had my mom's house. She also had the Noritake china my dad sent back from Japan in 1951. And there was kind of an emotional attachment to that because it was my dad. He died over 50 years ago. We lost him young. And so there's that. And part of me was kind of pissed that she didn't ask me if I wanted any of the china. I got it now when I didn't need it. I had just bought service for 16, but that's another story. And she gave me the Hummels. I said, what am I supposed to do with them?
Nobody wants them. Kids don't want them. Oh, I have to back up. I did add a codicil to my will that my kids are not allowed to give away my grandmother's china charger plates. Now, I won't be around to see if they listen to me, but I do believe in Jewish guilt. I absolutely do. So, what can you do?
Well, just last week, the week before, one of my long-lost cousins in Colorado, and that's another whole presentation. I just came back from a 4,200-mile trip, drove to Colorado to see cousins I hadn't seen in 68 years. So, at any rate, she posted an article on Facebook about valuables you may have at home. Hummels. Who knew? Not worth that much. I could probably get $10 or $15 for each one. I've got about 15 or 20 of them, and it's just not worth it to me. And I said something. She says, oh, I love Hummels. I said, do you want them? And she said, yes, I have the bubble wrap. They're all, I may keep one for these presentations, but everything else is going out to Colorado. And the point of this is to ask. Last night I got rid of the Noritake china. My grandchild's former girlfriend, who's still a good friend, was over to celebrate the birthday yesterday, and she says, do you still have that china? I said, yes. And she took 2 big boxes out, service for 12. So keep talking to people. But what my sister did is she hired a firm to come into the house, take pictures of everything, and had an online auction. And at the end of the auction, she would get a certain percentage of whatever the price was. I think it was like 55% or something. And they would get rid of everything else. So for her, it was a win-win. She had a fully furnished condo down in Florida. She didn't need to bring anything. But she was hilarious. She says, you know, my dining room table, I mean, it's 45 years old, dining room set, it's only got $7 bid on it. Says, that ugly candy dish I brought back, that was 15 bucks. What in the world are they thinking? But she had a blast with it, and they took care of everything for her.
And there are companies around
Maxsold.
here that can do it.
I think
as well.
Maxsold does that as
Maxsold,
well.
M-A-X-X. And by the way, all of these resources are on our resource list. You can access that list on our downsizersstay.com website, so that you can take a look and find the one that might help you. And if not, you can just call us and we'll be glad to help.
Could you repeat that website, please?
It's downsizeorstay.com.
Can't believe I got that URL.
I know, it was a good one.
Thank you.
Sure.
Did we forget anything?
Probably. Yeah. Probably. I think that the takeaway I would love for you to have is that you don't have to do everything by yourselves. And if it's that you want to stay in your home but it needs retrofitting, there are people who can do this, who understand the needs, who are well-versed in ADA outlines and requirements, American with Disability Act. And that means you could stay in your home for a whole lot longer, even if it's a simple addition of a grab bar or the lowering of the threshold to get into your shower, or the widening of your doorway so that if you ever needed to be wheelchair bound, you could drive yourself in there. So, you don't have to tackle these things alone. And I think that so many of us are sort of stuck in time because it feels so overwhelming. And there are a lot of resources that can help you get over that hump. It's funny, I had a conversation with my daughter yesterday. I didn't tell you this. My husband, who is working full-time, is semi-disabled. He's on a walker, he uses a scooter, but his brain is all there. And over the pandemic, his firm allowed him to work from home, and now they're saying he has to go back in. Now, he hasn't driven in 3 years, and it would fall to me to get him from Wayland, where we live, into town at least 2 days a week.
Post Office Square.
Yeah, into Post Office Square. And so I started, we have 4 children, 3 of them live in the area, and I started asking, who can help me with this? And it was like, what is the nursery rhyme? The little red hen who asks everybody for help and nobody shows up. But Mom, we all have really busy lives.
And you don't.
So counting on our kids to get us through this, it's just not realistic, and it doesn't pay to be disappointed in them when there are other resources.
The other thing she has had to deal with is her children treating her like their child. You know, Dad, Mom, you don't want to do that.
You're too old to do that.
You're too old to do that.
Excuse me. I actually tell my kids that I will text them and tell them when I'm senile. Because I'm not there yet, thank you very much, go away. And I know it all comes from a well-meaning place, that they're protective of us, but they're all 2 income, to support their families. It takes 2 incomes and busy lives. And unfortunately, we really can't count on them. We really can't. So knowing that there are other resources available, frankly, and we have learned this along the way, the best resource or the best place to find resources for you is right here in this building. that I'm pretty sure you know an awful lot about how to help folks get the help they need. And you just have to ask.
I think that's it. What questions do you
We'd
have?
love to answer
You're the
your
quietest group we have.
You haven't met me. Thank you for your excellent presentation. So if one decides to stay in one's home for now, is there a metric or algorithm or percentage or words of advice how much money to actually spend on that house?
It depends on where you are in that spectrum as far as how healthy you are. But there are certain basics if you're going to, if you're like Annette and you want to be carried out feet first, then I would look at it for the long term and make any of the adjustments that you think may be necessary, including identifying another room that perhaps an aide could stay in.
You did that with Richard.
I did that. My husband had quad bypass surgery smack in the middle of COVID. It was not fun, but we had the loft upstairs and I could have an aide in the house. And that was a godsend, okay? So I would have a consultation with an informed architect. There are a lot of good architects. I don't know how many of them specialize in retrofitting a house to be safe. And so I would start there and listen to his recommendations, or hers, sorry. I gotta be politically correct.
No.
There. Thank you.
Sure. Anything else?
And I cannot stress enough, get good help from a financial advisor. That's probably the first place I would go. And a senior attorney.
And the other thing I would say is that if you're going to live in your home until you can't any longer, do you really care about the value? That relative algorithmic value. You've got to do what you need to do to make it safe and comfortable for you to do so.
Is there such a thing as a HELOC loan still in
The
existence?
HELOC is that line of credit, it's the same product.
That I have.
Home equity line of credit is what that stands for. So if you've got enough income to give the bank that comfort zone that you'd be able to pay it back, in other words, Social Security plus your investments, plus some assets that could be tapped if necessary, then you probably can qualify. If not, then that's when the reverse mortgage may be advantageous to you. Any other questions for us?
Thank you very much.
You too.